Hey everyone, my name is Brandon Scott. I'm a wedding photographer based in Monterey, California, and I wanted to share my experience with you today of Leica's 24-90 Vario Elmerit SL1 2.8 to f4 24-90 zoom lens. Let's get into it. Full disclosure, this lens was lent to me by Leica while my 35 APO SL prime lens is in their hands getting an issue worked on. There was like a ball bearing kind of that came loose floating around the lens inside the barrel. It's had a very hard life over the last 4 years as my main go-to lens, so it was probably about time that it got sent in for service anyways. So I've had this lens for the last 3 months and I've used it at a ton of weddings, shoots, and have a lot of condensed experience with it, and figured that my perspective as a working wedding photographer could help you when making a decision whether or not this lens is the right one for you. So overall, I have used a couple zoom lenses in my past, but I am a prime shooter through and through. When I first started wedding photography 15 years ago, my goodness, I was using Canon's 24-70 zoom lens and their 16-35. And both of those lenses had great reputations and probably still do. As my photography evolved and my style and preferences started to take shape, I started to realize that I don't think of wedding photography in zoom lens ways. What does that mean? When I look at a scene, I look at it and I think to myself in a fixed focal length term. That's a 28, that's a 35, that's a 75, for example. And I can just grab the camera that has that prime lens on it, I can shoot, and I can just kind of keep on moving. I found myself when using this at the first wedding I was using it at, kind of jumping back into that same sort of frazzled mindset that got me into prime lenses in the first place all those years ago, which was kind of hunting around between focal lengths in order to find that perfect focal length. I guess I just now, if I need to do the same thing, I'm cropping in Lightroom just a little bit. But having all of these focal lengths available to me kind of makes me anxious or something. It distracts me and kind of pulls me out of that moment that I was in. I don't know, maybe zoom lenses would work really well for me if there were maybe hard detents at each of the primary focal lengths, but because you can kind of operate anywhere in between, I get stressed out and I spend way too much time trying to make the photo perfect in the camera rather than dealing with it later. It's such a weird thing to articulate and explain, but yeah, I just guess I think more in hard focal increments rather than this very fluid, kind of in between focal lengths nature. Having the convenience of all of these focal lengths in one lens is really great if you're into zoom lenses and you prefer that look or that packaging, but that's just not for me. Overall, this lens is built like a tank. It's a football. Like all of Leica's lenses for the SL system, they are made of solid metal. This one is made in Germany. They have a 24-70 that is made in Portugal, in their Portugal factory, that I believe is a partnership with Sigma. There's that L-mount alliance, so they work very closely with Panasonic and Sigma on developing some lenses, not all of them. This is a Leica lens through and through, Leica developed. It's not a collaboration with any other camera brand. The throw of the barrel here is so cathartic. It is just, the machining of this thing is unreal. I mean, it is probably one of the most well-built instruments I have ever held, and it weighs like its build quality. It's simple. There's no other switches or buttons or anything like that to get in the way. It is just the focal lengths, but there are no other distractions on this lens at all. I've just been using this Hoya 82mm filter, this just clear UV one. It's pretty inexpensive, just to protect this while I have this in my custody so as to not damage the front lens element or even the focus ring here. It's just so pretty. And while I'm borrowing it, I want to make sure I get it back to Leica in the exact same way they let me borrow it. The hood that comes with it is a bit of a statement. It is big. It is, in my opinion, ugly.
That's what she said.
And as a photographer who does their best to not be noticed most of the time, this was not the hood for that role. I didn't use it, instead used the filter, like I mentioned. I'm sure that that hood performs like so well and is hyper functional, but it is just, it's just loud, you know? Just something to keep in mind if you're trying to maybe be discreet using this lens. The other reason why I am just not a candidate for this lens or any zoom is because, I mean, you can like hear the machining, first of all, that's just perfect. But you can hear the air being displaced. You know, think about this, I guess, for a little bit. When you're extending the barrel, when you're zooming, there's air that is being made up on this side in order to allow this to extend and not pull a vacuum. If air couldn't come in, then this would just snap right back down. Similarly, when you try and compress this back down, if it didn't have a way to expel air, then again, there'd be kind of a vacuum lock here and the barrel wouldn't be able to fully retract. Though this is weather sealed, there is air movement. Otherwise, this wouldn't be able to happen. Being that I'm a wedding photographer in Monterey by the coast of California, I shoot in Big Sur a ton. My like overall kind of aesthetic is like outdoor California or like adventure-y type weddings. And I'm in a lot of times very salty, salt spray, beachy environments. And I'm already a little bit concerned about dust and everything affecting the very well sealed prime lenses that I use, but I would be even that much more neurotic about dust somehow entering in the zoom lens with every kind of like, I think it's almost like an air pump in a way, with every, you know, extension and compression of the lens barrel. Not ideal. Again, that's just like for my type of photography. And even if I was using it for landscape photography, which I think this lens would be great at, you know, you're in some of those environments as well as a landscape photographer, but for me, the difference is how often I'm shooting in those environments. I mean, even with the APO SL lenses without, you know, a moving front element, everything is of course internalized as a prime lens. I still have a speck of dust on the 75 that I'm using to shoot these overhead shots with. I'll find a photo and drop it in here so you can see. It doesn't affect image quality, but that's like kind of best case, like weather sealing scenario, and it still has a speck of dust right behind the front element. So I can only imagine with the level of usage that I would kind of put a zoom lens like this through in the environments that I'm in, it would just be a matter of time till this thing gets a little bit filthier than I would like it to. Zoom lens life, not for me, prime guy all the way through. The other thing that kind of makes me hesitate about getting one of these lenses, of course, is the variable aperture. I almost said issue, but it's not an issue. It just is what it is. It is a 2.8 on the 24 end and a 4.0 on the 90 end. And for me, at weddings where you have all sorts of unpredictable lighting environments, it's just difficult to be tethered to that even the 2.8, but especially the 4. The lens has image stabilization in it. The SL2S has fantastic image stabilization also. And its ISO performance is crazy, but even with all of those things, I still found myself just wishing so badly to have my Summicron SL with the 2.0 aperture back on. It's just a little bit too limiting. From a technical performance perspective. The other way though that aperture range is somewhat limiting to me, the way I take pictures, is my style and my aesthetic is very much in pursuit of nostalgia. I want photos that couples to receive to feel like a memory. And sometimes having that hyper clinical, clean, surgical, crisp image, it doesn't do that objective service. So that's why I use lenses like the 50 Summilux M lens, the aspherical one, not the current version, because it does give you that ethereal background The out of focus elements are kind of the aesthetic that I'm always in pursuit of, and the equivalent 50 on, you know, the 24 to 90 just doesn't do it for me. It's it's too clean. And but that's like just for me, and it might not be that way for you. You might be one of those photographers that's in pursuit of the cleanest image, and in that case, this lens might be a good one for you to consider. I will say, when I first got this lens, it was a day actually that I had a shoot, and I just decided to use only this and leave my primes at home. And it was such a foreign experience throwing this onto the front of the camera and having an entire bag's worth of lenses in one single lens here. The convenience was nuts, and I was really excited to see if maybe a zoom lens will work for me. But after, again, experiencing the character difference between all of the focal lengths and the lenses that I have compared to the zoom lens, it just it just didn't do it. Again, that's not to say that it couldn't be a perfect lens for you. If you're the person who loves zoom lenses and especially loves the rendering of that like higher aperture look, then I'm super jealous, to be honest with you, because being able to have all of those focal lengths baked into this is, the convenience just isn't matched. It's so nice to have just one camera and one lens sometimes. Though this lens is $6,000 brand new, it's been around for long enough that you can find them used for a pretty good discount. Another thing to consider if you're trying to decide between going the zoom lens life or the prime lens life, the cost to purchase each of the focal lengths that this lens contains within is a lot more expensive than just buying one lens with all those focal lengths. The question that you just need to ask yourself is, are the character differences a worthy enough trade-off? And something else that's going for this lens that isn't for a lot of others is that it has image stabilization baked into it, in addition to the image stabilization that the Leica SL2, SL2S, SL3, soon to be SL3S have. That gives you a ton of hand holdability if you're looking to use this, especially as a video lens, which I could totally see it performing well as. All that to say, this lens is fantastic, and I wouldn't dissuade anybody from buying it, but I would definitely encourage you to try it, especially if you've never used a zoom lens or haven't used a zoom lens in a long time. There are definitely trade-offs when it comes to the aesthetic and the character attributes of a lens like this. I think that this lens is fantastic for a landscape photographer and maybe a wedding photographer, just maybe not for the way that I photograph weddings, but maybe for the way you photograph weddings. As a travel lens, I don't know. Again, for the way that you travel, it might be great. For the way that I travel, I'm, all about this like small, compact 35 Summicron, just to be discreet. And again, light. This thing is not light. It is heavy. I appreciate the heft. I don't want to necessarily say that as a con or a disadvantage. I like it when things I use are heavy for their size. I think that it conveys a sense of quality, and usually it means that it's pretty high quality. But it is just something to consider when you're traveling. Okay, so I have some photos that I took using the 24 to 90 and pairing them up with the equivalent focal length of prime lenses that I own. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and start on the farther end, the telephoto end. We have the 24 to 90. There we go. Let's do the comparison thing. We have the Summicron SL on the right and the 24 to 90 on the left. Obviously, we're at 90 on the 24 to 90, so we're beholden to that f4, whereas the Summicron, of course, is f2 all the way. And yeah, I guess what you'd expect. You have a lot more definition in the background with the 24 to 90 at f4 than you clearly do with the Summicron. The subject sharpness is, I would say, honestly, same. If we look at eyelashes here, you can maybe see a little bit more definition on the APO Summicron, but for all intents and purposes, I don't think anybody's going to notice that type of difference in real life. I think the main takeaway here is if you're looking for a lens that has greater subject separation from the background, obviously you're going to be looking for something with a shallower depth of field or a lower f-stop than f4. Okay, so we have the 24 to 90 on the left again and the Summicron on the right. So getting closer to the subject will obviously start pushing the out of focus areas even more farther away from our subject. Here, of course, the 90 Summicron on the right and the 24 to 90 on the left. The 24 to 90 is still beautiful, and the subject separation, of course, it's at 90, is still going to be there, but clearly greater on the F2 Summicron. You could see here sharpness of like the eyelashes are a little bit sharper on the Summicron than on the 24 to 90. Again, real world differences, nobody's going to notice. Overall, both are really beautiful, but you can just kind of see what you're giving up if you're looking to get a zoom lens with that higher variable aperture. Popping back over. Okay, we're going to move our way down to 75. Let's start here. Okay, so we got the 24 to 90 on the left again, the APO 75 on the right. Clearly see up here that I tried my best to do 75, but ended up at 77, which kind of brings me to another little sticky point for me in the way that my brain works. Sometimes, often, I have the need to sort a bunch of photos by the focal length, and it's so frustrating to have like these random, even when I was getting, all of this set up, it was so frustrating to have to sort by focal length, and you have like 75 and 77 and 50 and 49 and 34 and 35 instead of just the clean 75, 35, 50, etc. Popping back in, 24 to 90 on the left, Summicron on the right, more definition on the 24 to 90 in the background, less on the 75, much more subject separation. Could kind of take a look here with eyelashes, pretty much the same, hair, same, a lot of same, but look at the tree trunk behind, of course, that makes such a difference. These are all edited, by the way, with kind of my presets that I use for delivery. I just figured why not give the most realistic output scenario. You could see here this like branch up in the corner is just completely gone out of focus in the 75. There's much less distractions back here than there are over here on the 24 to 90. And again, I'm just showing you the opportunity cost of using a zoom lens. If you're looking for a shallower depth of field, what you can expect to get in the at least Summicron prime lens camp compared to the 24 to 90 zoom. So 24 to 90 on the left, the Summicron on the right. As we get closer to the subject, even less is defined in the background. The 24 to 90 is of course so pretty, but yes, you are getting a much more defined background than you do with the Summicron. So if more subject separation is what you're looking for, the answer is obvious. We can zoom in again just for good measure, and you can see eyelashes are both same. 24 to 90 on the left, Summicron on the right, and just kind of one more demonstrating the difference in bokeh back here, especially in the trees, while still, maintaining that like really excellent image clarity between both lenses. I'd say there's no difference. We want to pop over to the 50 here. We got the 24 to 90 on the right this time, and the Summilux on the left. The 24 to 90 is sitting at a f-stop of 3.6, while of course the Summilux is at 1.4, and the difference could not be more striking. The 1.4, you got this like circular, swirly, shallow bokeh going on. It's very dreamy, and on the 24 to 90, it's just much more clinical. Again, nothing wrong with either, more just a difference that you should be aware of when you're choosing a lens that has a higher f-stop than another. Sharpness is going to be a little bit higher, I think, on the 24 to 90. You can kind of make a little bit more out in facial features and that kind of a thing, but of course the background is wildly different. If you're looking for a character lens, the 50 Summilux is going to be the way to go compared to something like a 24 to 90. Okay, here we go with a much less fair comparison in terms of rendering, but we have the 24 to 90 on the left, and we have the Summicron 35 on the right, not the APO, but actually the vintage King of Bokeh, so-called King of Bokeh. So the King of Bokeh, very, very stylized lens, very much renders a look. And the 24 to 90, of course, is pretty much as modern as it gets, and both show that. So up here on the left, you got just like kind of the wild, glowy artifacting up here with the King of Bokeh and the Summicron, whereas on the left here, the 24-90 kind of keeps a more modern rendering. You could see here, especially on the right, this like, I don't know how to explain it. There's somebody out there who I'm sure has all the proper terms, but hazy streaky effect going on here, which is so characteristic of vintage Leica lenses in my experience. And if you're looking for that sort of character, filmic, dreamy, like especially, you know, down here in the lower left-hand corner of the grasses, if you're looking for this dreamy, undefined, filmic, imperfect look, then I mean, you're just not gonna clearly achieve that with the 24-90, but you got it all day long with the vintage Summicron. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab another set. Okay, we got another one a little bit closer to the model, aka my wife. We have the 24-90 on the left, the King of Bokeh on the right, and the closer you get in, you definitely start to see the 24-90 have a fuzzier depth of field, or bokeh here, the depth of field kind of shallowing up a little bit, and then the 35 Summicron just gets even more wild back there with a lot more of that swirly bokeh that we saw on the 51.4. Both are very beautiful and both just render differently, of course. You can look at subject sharpness, and 24-90 absolutely whomps the Summicron, the vintage Summicron in that department, but that's what you expect and that's what you're looking for. I think, at least for me in wedding photography, a lot of couples now are just looking for that less sharp, nostalgic, I hesitate saying the word vintage vibe. I'd say like, yeah, just nostalgic, almost film look. Being able to have a 35 that offers that filmic baseline is pretty great. And that's one of the things that I love about shooting the SL line too, which is I have access to all of the most modern looking lenses with fast autofocus and clinical sharpness. And I also have the ability to throw on some vintage lenses from the film days and at least kind of get closer to that film nostalgic aesthetic that a lot of couples are digging these days. Here, 24-90 on the left and vintage Summicron on the right. And you can definitely see down here the difference in the way that the vintage Summicron kind of renders this foreground versus how sharp the 24-90 is. I mean, shoes, same thing, just nice and hazy, very filmy over there on the right, and still just classic and sharp on the left. The last focal length we're going to hit up is the 28. 24-90 on the right this time, and the Summicron 28 on the left. This is actually kind of funny that this happened because it sort of proves my point that I was making earlier in the video. With the variable aperture, I so often just in the rushedness of the moment forget to readjust the aperture if I'm going back to a lower focal, like a smaller focal length, like 28. So the 3.6 is still there, hanging out there from when I was shooting at the longer focal lengths, and I didn't even notice and forgot to change it. So this would happen all the time at weddings. I would just forget that I need to sometimes bring the f-stop back down. I'm sure there's a way to do it automatically as you adjust down, but for some reason it just wouldn't do it all the time. So yeah, here we go, 28 at 3.6. It could have been probably closer to 3. So 28. Let's check out foreground sharpness or subject sharpness. Both look same, which is to say beautiful. Background a lot less defined with the APO Summicron on the left and much more defined with the 24-90 up in the corners. It's, yeah, both are really pretty, just different looks. Over here, kind of in the grass, you can kind of see the way that it's rendering a little bit there. With the lower focal lengths, you can start to see less of a difference between the two. Yeah, let's check out one last photo. 24-90 on the right again, and the APO Summicron on the left, still at 3.6 because still I forgot to adjust the f-stop. Subject sharpness, still sharp on both. Trees up here, very similar. Again, when you get to the smaller focal lengths, you start to see fewer differences between subject separation and background elements. Overall, very, very similar at this focal length. So there you go. There's some side-by-sides that hopefully can help you see the difference that I'm talking about between the focal lengths on the 24-90 and their equivalent pairings in the prime lens offerings. This lens deserves every bit of praise that's been heaped upon it over the years. It's absolutely fantastic. It's just the aesthetic qualities aren't the type of image output that I am looking for personally. It's a subjective thing, of course, and that's something that you need to determine for yourself and the way that you take photos. I don't know. I think that it's ideal for a landscape photographer. It's ideal for somebody who's wanting to have incredibly clean image quality in one lens, maybe with one body. Great for video, except for, again, keeping in mind the variable aperture. But yeah, overall, I am, of course, infinitely grateful that Leica let me borrow this while my 35 was in the shop. I am, however, very much looking forward to getting my 35 back. So anyways, I hope that review was helpful. And yeah, if you guys have any questions or concerns or different experiences with this lens, I think that the comment section is always a great place to let me hear about it and let others who might be looking at this lens hear, you know, maybe your perspective that's very different from mine. If you're interested in following along and kind of seeing what I create with the Leica SL system, with M lenses, with SL lenses, my Instagram handle is Hello Brandon Scott. I'd love to have you join me over there. Also, please like and subscribe. This is a newer channel and all of that helps tremendously. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.